Welcome, everybody. We are super excited about our first event of 2026. We're starting the year with lots of energy, not only for our events, which are always kind of um, the gathering of COP members, but this year we have a very special work stream. We're going to be launching 2 working groups, and we are so excited because that's where the real hands-on work of this community will happen. Last year, as you remember, we had the policy dialogues in collaboration with UN Women, and that was a fantastic series of events to really hear from different segments of our community and really grow and get momentum as a community. This year, we want to know who, we want to engage more meaningfully with all of you and create spaces where we can connect, exchange, and really work towards outputs that we think our community needs. Next one. Thank you. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Francia and Barsha, who will be leading us in the working groups. The goal is to have outputs produced out of these working groups. One, Francia will be leading us on measurement and ethical research, and Barsha will be leading us in policy influence, regulation, and advocacy. And if I could ask you two, Francia first, to introduce yourselves.
My name is Francia Baltazar. I am based in Mexico City, and I am thrilled to be part of this working groups. And we will be collaborating to put together 2 main outputs. One would be a handbook for digital research for TFGBV implementers, and we're trying to make this one very practical. It would be in the form of checklists, templates, and very practical is the word, tools for researchers who will be working with TFGBV research. The other output would be in the form of concept notes to support advocacy on measurement priorities and ethical research. And these outputs will be co-created with experts' input and expertise throughout the year. The first meeting to align on goals and how you may contribute is the first week of May. And we will provide more concrete details as soon as possible.
Great. Thank you, Francia. We're so excited to have you. And she comes to us with lots of experience in gender justice, digital rights, and policy development. We're super lucky to have you. We'll also be having Barsha, who's a digital rights expert with 18 years of experience in tech governance and gender justice, specializing in building global advocacy networks and multi-stakeholder dialogues, joining us for the policy influence, regulation, and advocacy. I know she was having trouble joining the call. So let me see if she is now with us. I don't believe so. So let me just share from her that we are super excited to be leading this second working group centered around safety by design. And we really want to move past the traditional content breakdown model and instead explore how safety is experienced across different sociocultural contexts. So we can build protection directly into digital architecture. So our working group is all about being about the future, but pragmatic and mapping stakeholders and bringing governance gaps to create gender inclusive solutions for the most marginalized. So we have amazing ideas about how to engage different stakeholders as part of this group. And this group will kick off right after RightsCon. But if any of you will be there, please send us an email because we're seeing how we can possibly get the community together at RightsCon. So with that, we're super excited about these working groups. You'll be hearing from me in the chat now how you can join, but then later as well, sending you links on how you can join and how you can participate in them. Thank you again for being a part of this community. And now I'm going to hand it over to Sangeeta Chatterjee, who's a research director at SVRI and leads a lot of the work on TFGBV research, to take us over our panel.
Thank you so much, Ale. As we all know, especially in this community of practice, technology-facilitated gender-based violence is an evolving field. And it's especially challenging to develop measures for a construct like TFGBV, where new forms of TFGBV are still being identified and definitions are also, as a consequence, being constantly updated to keep up with the research in the field. In this very challenging and evolving field, our panelists are doing the hard work of collating and developing resources for measurement for the field. And I'm very excited to hear from all of them to learn more about their ongoing research on measurement from three very distinct vantage points. And to get us started, I want to welcome our first speaker, Victoria Isika from Innovations for Poverty Action. She's the Associate Director of Policy and Gender for IPA East Africa, where she leads the strategy for advancing evidence-based policies to improve the lives of women and girls. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us today. And congratulations on releasing the TFGBV measurement compendium from IPA. It's such a useful resource for all of us. So to kick us off, could you tell us a little bit about the compendium, what it includes, and who it's meant for?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sanjita, and thank you for the opportunity. For the next slide, please. So just to give a quick overview of our TFGBV compendium. So the compendium is a publicly available resource that we at IPA, or Innovations for Poverty Action, developed together with Sistema Cultura, and it brings together existing validated quantitative TFGBV instruments, which we identified through a systematic review of peer-reviewed literature published between 2009 and 2025. And during this exercise, we found that most of the validated instruments were developed in high-income country context. So there's a very limited representation from low and middle-income country contexts. Our compendium is obviously not intended to be exhaustive, but rather we hope that it will be some sort of living document that will evolve as new measures emerge. And we also hope that it serves as a stepping stone or as a foundation towards creating TFGBV survey instruments that are both locally grounded and adapted to various contexts. Next slide. So about its content, when it comes to the content, so within the compendium, we've listed 19 validated quantitative instruments that are measuring various manifestations of TFGBV, such as cyberbullying, tech-facilitated intimate partner violence, online harassment, image-based sexual abuse, sextortion, cyber dating abuse, etc., and covering diverse populations, so adolescents, young adults, working adults, and so forth. And within the compendium, we've identified whether measures assess victimization, perpetration, or both. And we also show coverage of frequency, severity, and impact. And we also note whether relational context is included. We've also synthesized key methodological considerations for measuring TFGBV, which is highly informed by guidelines shared by UNFPA and ICRW. And in terms of its intended users, we are really targeting researchers, policymakers, and practitioners, obviously to strengthen the evidence base on TFGBV. And ultimately, we hope that this will shape policies, programs, and decisions in the ecosystem or, to address TFGBV.
Thanks so much, Vicky. And I think it's a really fantastic resource. And I really appreciate that in the compendium towards the end, you actually have all the items from the measures, which I think is going to be very useful for researchers, because that can often be a challenge to sort of know what are all the questions contained in a particular measure. And you often have to hunt for that. And as you said, a lot of these measures have been developed in high-income countries. So based on, this desk research for this compendium and your own field experience, how are you going about adapting some of these measures of TFGBV to reflect the lived realities of women in Uganda and Nigeria in your work? If you could share that with us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sanjita, for the question. And maybe to address that question, I need to provide a very quick taste or a quick overview of our project, our TFGBV project in Uganda and Nigeria. And the overall objective of this project is to develop a TFGBV tool that is tailored to the experiences of women in these two countries. I prepared also a slide for that. So I just wanted to give us all a quick taste of the key phases of our project. So if you could please go to the next slide. Yes, so we obviously didn't start by creating the tool. We first started by looking at what is existing out there. So in late 2024, we conducted a thorough scan of existing surveys and measures, surveys that were measuring different forms of TFGBV. This is what we later published in March of this year as the compendium. And so from this scan, and as I said earlier, we found that most of the existing measures or TFGBV surveys were developed in high-income country settings. So there was very limited input from LMIC contests. But despite this, we still drew on what we knew. We drew on what was existing or is existing, and conducted these qualitative workshops with women in Uganda and Nigeria to understand their lived experiences of TFGBV. So we embarked on this exercise. We started embarking on this exercise mid last year, and I'll speak a little bit more about our qualitative workshops. But as we were starting these workshops in these two countries, we more or less at the same time started engaging government partners and key stakeholders within the ecosystem. So of course, we wanted them to know about the project, perhaps even if they could help inform this process. But the key objective for engaging stakeholders was really to start exploring pathways of integrating the finalized survey instrument into their data collection system. So why is this important to us? So for example, if the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development in Uganda integrates a TFGBV tool in its data collection systems, they're then able to routinely collect TFGBV data, and this will, hopefully shape policies, decisions, and programs addressing TFGBV. So that phase, we started that exercise, as I said, mid last year as we were conducting the co-creation workshops with women, and it's an ongoing process, right? But currently, so since we have a draft instrument ready, we are just about to start pre-testing the tool in the field, and we hope to, we're just hoping that it will be validated by mid this year, and then we'll be disseminating the tool around July, August of this year. And maybe just to speak a little bit to the workshops themselves. So please move to the next slide, Paula. So as I said, we did these qualitative workshops with women in Uganda and Nigeria. So we sampled women across or from high and lower income settings or social economic backgrounds, and we really structured these conversations or discussions with them around short vignettes, which these vignettes are depicting various forms of TFGBV. So like doxing, group attacks, extortions, etc., and really wanted to understand how familiar they were or they are with this form of violence, or the forms of violence that we're exemplifying, whether they had heard of something similar happening within their communities or neighborhoods, and also how they understood its severity and frequency. And so these conversations really prompted them to share their stories, so stories based on their context. So these deeply localized accounts ultimately enabled us to develop the TFGBV tool that is, tailored to their context.
Thank you so much. Cool. And this sounds like it was, of course, like, you've put in so much time to do all of these sort of participatory workshops that are really crucial to, develop ethically, sort of culturally sensitive measures. And so what suggestions do you have for others looking to adapt measures for their context, given a lot of us in this community of practice may also be keen to do that in our work?
Yeah. So next slide, please. So based on our experience, we have found I just wanted to highlight about 3 things that we found are important that we could suggest for other people who are interested in this type of work. So the first thing is that it's really important to start with what already exists, right? So instead of reinventing the wheel, it's really important for us to start with conducting a review of existing validated measures before creating something new. And also, it's really important, as we've seen in our case, to work with affected communities. So women in our case, so we really involve them from the outset and really working with them to refine the survey instrument, again, to ensure that they reflect their lived realities. But much as it's important to co-create these tools with women, it's also very important to involve key stakeholders like government partners from the outset. And this is important because we feel like it strengthens ownership, improves relevance, and increases the likelihood of uptake within existing data systems and processes. And the last point, I think, is quite obvious, and everyone who's a researcher or has been involved in research knows that it's really important to invest time in translating, pre-testing, and piloting the tool. Yeah, so those are the 3 to 4 suggestions I would share with us in relation to adapting measures across contexts.
One last question, just to give our sort of everyone in the audience also a sense of, you've undertaken this large body of work to do this adaptation. Like, how long do you think it took you just for the adaptation phase to conduct these participatory workshops and the translation and all of this, just so we have an idea of how much time goes into this work?
So I think it depends. So in our context, we probably estimated about 6 months or so. There's a translation, back translation as well. So those are like two-tiered processes. After which, of course, when you have the tool ready, you need to test it in the fields, right, with a smaller sample. And then after which you do the actual data collection with the tool that you've created before disseminating it. So I would say give or take 6 to 9 months, depending on the context, depending on the length of your survey, etc. But can I add something that was tied to my second question and I probably left out? I wanted to just give a quick highlight of our findings and from the conversations that we had with the women in Uganda and Nigeria, because I think it's really important to present the voices of the women that we engaged in this context. So from our analysis or from the conversations that we had, again, based on those qualitative vignettes that I had mentioned, so those are what structured the conversations, we learned that perpetrators of TFGBV, based on their experience, are mostly men. And these were men that were known to the women. So they could be current partners, they could be former partners, they could be bosses, they could be co-workers, neighbors, etc. But much as men were highlighted as the main perpetrators, we also saw that women participated in certain forms of harms, on online harms, so such as spreading rumors, joining group attacks, and also sharing intimate images out of envy or conflict. And I think this is really important to highlight because it shows that TFGBV is perhaps even more complex as we think. We can't really reduce the issue to a simple binary of male perpetrators versus female victims, right? And one other interesting finding that we discovered or uncovered during our analysis of the conversations with the women is that a woman's social economic status really shapes the experiences of tech facilitated GBV. Remember that we spoke with women from high income backgrounds and also low income backgrounds, and we found that most of the lower income women use their phones and social media to sell their products, find clients, or access job opportunities. And this exposed them to certain forms of TFGBV more than the high income women. So job scams and financial scams were some of the examples. And higher income women expressed, or they showed greater greater digital literacy. And this also showed us that when a higher income woman is more visible online, that visibility may be used against us. So they also experience, or certain forms of TFGBV as a result of their increased online presence. So I just wanted
Thank
to
you so
highlight.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vicky, for sharing your work. And we'll come back to you again at the end of our session to continue our conversation. And everyone in the audience, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions that you would like the panelists to ask. We'll have a Q&A session at the end of our session today. I would now like to introduce our second panelist, Lynn Marie Sardinia. She is a technical officer in violence against women data and measurement at the WHO. And she leads WHO's work on the production of global prevalence estimates and also leads the portfolio on strengthening violence against women data and measurement. Welcome, Lynn Marie. Thank you so much for being here and sharing the work that WHO and partner organizations are doing to develop measures for TFGBV measurement frameworks. So we're all familiar with the WHO prevalence estimates on intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence, almost the gold standard of measuring IPV at least. So what is the WHO's approach of integrating TFGBV into its measurement work on IPV and non-partner sexual violence?
Thanks very much, Sangeeta. And I think to start off with, it might be good to give an overview of what we actually measure as forms of IPV, intimate partner violence, and non-partner sexual violence in the WHO multi-country study instrument that is now used and adapted in over 69 countries globally. Can I have the slides, please, to help? Great. So this is just the broad overview for context. So we measure physical, sexual, psychological, and economic abuse by a partner, as well as physical and sexual violence by someone other than a partner, sexual harassment including in contexts like schools, public places, and the workplace, risk factors, associations with violence, and a range of health outcomes, and also coping strategies and help seeking. So with this background in mind, can I have the next slide? And taking into account, and here again, all of us here, it's like preaching to the converted, we know the myriad forms of technology facilitated abuse, not all of which, so some of them are uniquely perpetrated with the use of technology, whereas others are, happen both ways, online and offline, the whole continuum. And the challenge here, to get to your question, Sangeeta, about measuring, this is the operationalization. So this was a definition that we, together with UN Women and UNFPA, at an expert group meeting of key stakeholders, conceptualize. So this is more a conceptual definition, and the challenge here is operationalizing it. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that some of the key aspects of this is that it's violence that is perpetrated using or exacerbated by technology. And really, really an important point is this continuum between online and offline violence. And none of the tech facilitated violence actually happens in a bubble. It also includes situations where something that starts off online, continues offline, sometimes even resulting in death, and the other way around. But we have to acknowledge that there are certain differential aspects of violence that is facilitated by technology that we need to tackle when we are measuring, we're trying to establish the magnitude of this violence, the extent of this violence, and the nature to inform evidence-based policy and programming. And if we go to the next slide, so the summary of the answer is, as of now, tech-facilitated violence against women that WHO is working on, including in surveys, is measured as a modality. So we are not measuring it as a new form of violence. We are talking about it as the existing forms of violence that are being exacerbated by technology. Having said this, I will say that the WHO Multi-Country Study Survey instrument is being updated to include questions on violence TFWOW as a modality. And these are being pilot tested and also will be cognitive tested. And like Vicky said, to learn much more from field learnings, from contexts, etc. And one example in the next slide, as you can see, is an adaptive, how we have included it within. So currently we have a question within an existing set of questions on controlling behaviors. That is the use of technology to control and track your partner. And the other two questions are in terms of the sharing and receiving of unwanted personal electronic images with sexual content. And to operationalize this in the field, if we go to the next slide, our colleagues UNFPA and KnowWow Data recently have been supporting the addition of questions. And this is an example here in Vanuatu. And Jessica, probably you are online as well on this call, but this is a really, really good example of how these acts or these items of violence that measure intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence are actually existing forms of violence, right? Just perpetrated and exacerbated by technology. And with that, I think as I'm speaking, we're already thinking of all the different considerations and challenges with measuring this in a comparable way across countries.
It's really exciting to hear that the WHO is developing sort of a measure and that's being tested right now, and very much look forward to looking at those results. And you were just beginning to allude to some of the challenges that you've sort of faced in developing measures for TFGBV that can be used across different countries and different contexts. So if you could talk a little bit about that from your experience.
Yes. Thanks, Sangeeta. And this, again, if you could go to the next slide, I try to summarize some of the many challenges. But one thing, these are the top ones, and I'm sure in the group in the discussion after this in the Q&A, we can delve into it a bit more. But denominators. So when we are talking about tech-facilitated violence against women or tech-facilitated GBV, we are talking about persons, women, who use technology and have access to technology. And so we need to be really aware of who is included and not included within this violence when you're trying to measure prevalence. And this is a particular challenge also when you're looking at tech-facilitated violence, as it should be as a modality. So when you saw the items earlier, once you start to add tech-facilitated violence, you know that not all of the questions that you're asking to all women may include women, may be appropriate for women who don't have access to technology. The type of acts, again, coming back to the operationalization of a very conceptual definition, what are we measuring? We are not there yet. Different surveys have different acts, different number of acts, and all this will affect how we come up with comparable prevalence estimates of this form of violence, and the balance between standardization and capturing country context. And here, again, I would reiterate the point Vicky made and discussions we've been having as an interagency group with the statistical framework is the importance also of the qualitative work in developing these quantitative measures. Then perpetrators, how do we know how to capture and analyze? Because with tech-facilitated violence, there is a large, even if largely perpetrated by a partner or someone known, if not a partner, what happens with secondary perpetrators, and how is this, for example, the sharing of images? Time frames, again, important. Are we asking, whether this violence was perpetrated in your lifetime? Is that going to be a valid measure, or do we do the past 12 months and how this fits with existing surveys? And also reporting practices. Currently, there is agreement that this reporting of tech-facilitated violence, even if measured as a modality with existing forms, needs to be reported separately to ensure comparability with across surveys, but also importantly across time. And for those of us who are involved in survey and questionnaire development and those in the field who are adapting and using these surveys, we know how long surveys already are, and it is a real factor, the whole interviewer and interviewee fatigue, with adding more questions on tech-facilitated violence. So with that, I will stop. There are many more, and one other aspect I will bring up when I'm about this is the acts base. So WHO and internationally now using behavioral specific acts are a gold standard. And I think that's why it's really important taking these things into consideration when we are trying to measure this new modality of violence.
Thank you so much, Lynn Marie. And we're a little out of time, so I'm going to go to our third set of panelists, and we'll come back to you again towards the end because I know that we'll have lots of questions from, sorry, that was my timer, from the audience about this really important work. So we'll come back to you towards the end. We'll now hear from our last set of speakers, Tavishi and Chloe from Equimundo. Tavishi Gupta is the Director of Research, Evaluation and Learning and an expert in masculinities and gender equality. And Chloe Lewis is the Deputy Director of Research, Evaluation and Learning at Equimundo with 15 years of expertise in gender and armed conflict. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspective on measurement. And, to get us started, Tavishi, working with men is such an important area for TFGBV prevention. And Lynn Marie also mentioned the challenge of, looking at perpetrators. And that, of course, is not the whole universe of how you work with men. But how does Equimundo critically think about masculinities and norms when measuring TFGBV?
Yeah, thank you, Sangeeta. I'll kick us off first. It's such a great question, and it's so great to be in this kind of group of people, because having that holistic view is exactly how Equimundo approaches the problem. We approach it with the conjunction and, like this and that. So let me sort of explicate that a little bit. We do believe that TFGBV is a structural problem rooted in patriarchy, in rigid gender norms, and the longstanding inequalities that have simply sort of found a way now through technology. And the COP has been doing a great job in kind of bringing the people who work on this together. So when we also think about TFGBV, we always center the role of masculinity as a root driver. Beyond that, we also start with a premise that this is not just about simply identifying bad actors, and therefore our work is done. We quite strongly lean into the systems perspective and ask about what are the social, economic, and digital structures that do produce the conditions for tech-facilitated gender-based violence. So very recently, and it's quite close to being public, we have been working with UN Women's Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Unit, and we are coming up with a desk review that we're calling Engaging Men, Ending Violence. One of the COP members, Velihi Bansal, who's actually in the attendees, who's attending this webinar, is also a co-author on that. And this sort of systems lens is being made very explicit in that desk review. We're applying that kind of masculinities lens and shifting the research focus from, in addition to looking at who is the victim suffering at the hands of TFGBV, what is the broader ecosystem that includes perpetration, socialization, and the digital infrastructure that enables it. So we're looking at three interlocking systems simultaneously. First, the social norms, right? And so, like I mentioned, the rigid masculine expectations around dominance, emotional repression, and sexual entitlement that are all coming mostly from the males, sort of the requirements and the restrictive norms around masculinities. The second is very important, is leaning into the digital ecosystem. What are the algorithms, amplification processes looking like? What are some of the monetization structures? What is the platform design that actively exploits and amplifies those very masculine norms for profit? And then, of course, as I mentioned, the economic and social conditions like economic precarity, declining mobility, and social isolation that impacts both women, men, and people of all genders that often also make young men very vulnerable to radicalization. What I think Equimundo's research for the past 2 decades has shown is that men's and boys' relationship with these restrictive norms of manhood are actually quite complex and sometimes contradictory. Sometimes men find comfort in these norms, but they're also having these negative outcomes like suicidality, depression, and sort of our measurement approach tries to capture this complexity. I really appreciate that Vicky mentioned this idea that, we can't just look at sort of the binary of perpetration and victimization, and that's kind of why we lean into calling it tech-facilitated gender-based violence, because that helps us underscore why the systems lens is important. With UN Women, the research that we're doing with them, we're also sort of collecting survey data. And so I can very briefly just highlight some kind of very top level takeaways that also underscore why the systems view becomes even more important. Men who hold, man box beliefs are obviously more likely in Brazil and in South Africa to adopt the misogynistic beliefs that show up online, right? So we've actually asked them questions on what are the misogynistic beliefs that they have exposure to and how much do they actually believe them. But it's not just the individual attitudes that impact how much they perpetrate TFGBV. Many of the men in both South Africa and Brazil report that they have no control. They feel like they have no control about what happens in their social media feeds. They're very aware of the algorithmic amplification. Most of them acknowledge that platforms deliberately show them content that's designed to pit groups against each other. So this question isn't just about sort of which men hold harmful beliefs. For us, it becomes really important to think about how do platforms monetize male insecurity and then turn it into a pipeline towards violence. I would love to invite Chloe, our deputy director, to kind of expand on this answer a little bit as well.
Sure. Thanks so much, Tavishi, and thank you all for joining us. It's a real joy to be chatting with you all and sharing some snippets of our research over at Equimundo. One of the analogies that keeps coming to my mind at the moment is this idea of a flowing tap. So this was a couple of years back, sitting in a sort of similar panel discussion in real life, though, with some representatives from the Office of the Secretary of the Special Representative to the Secretary General on addressing sexual violence and conflict. And they said that internally, they often feel like their job and their mandate is like mopping the floor with the tap still running. And I just remember hearing that and thinking, well, we just need to roll our sleeves up and become better plumbers and stop this tap from running. And I see us all working together, in this way to sort of become these better plumbers and stop this tap. And I think this kind of image of the tap is what Tavisha was speaking to, the sense of the systems lens and a masculinities lens that we need to kind of really understand the mechanics of. And I think, our research, supports that sense of understanding the mechanics, but also the kind of the whys the whys of the harmful messages resonating so much with such a sizable proportion of young men across the world. So as Tavisha mentioned, we're doing some work with UN Women's Ending Violence Against Women and Girls team, and this is part of our broader State of the World's Men study, which is an evolution of Equimundo's images work that includes kind of questions. It's a massive survey piece, so we're very grateful to our participants that have taken the time to respond, that looks at the interaction between men's online lives and their offline lives as well in quite a comprehensive way. And so to the question of how do we approach this work, it feels important to mention that our approach as an organization, as an institution, and as a study is really to start from a place of curiosity, to muster as much empathy as we can and to really ground the work in a kind of a through line of gender equality and relationality with accountability as well. And so it feels important to also say with that this curiosity and empathy for us to understand the risks and enabling factors doesn't mean that we're working to justify violence online or offline, or it doesn't mean that we're working to let men or perpetrators harms off the hook at all. But what we're really aiming to do is offer a diagnostic or deeper and sharper understanding of the risk enabling and protective factors to understand better how men of various kind of ages, life stages, and demographics are understanding the digital ecosystems that they're spending more and more time in, it seems, how they're interacting with the content and what's going on in their lives outside of their screens as well. And just feels, as a note, I'm conscious of time, to sort of say our research shows over and over that young men aren't going online actively seeking harmful content or misogynistic content. Our research from the Manosphere Rewired through to the studies that we're doing as part of State of the World's Men show that they're going online for dating advice, for career advice, sometimes for some fitness advice, sometimes, to understand actually how to be a dad. And in these spaces are then being pulled in very quickly within seconds to this more harmful content. So much more to say, but I'll also stop there and let Sangeeta bring us back to our next questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I'm conscious of time. So very quickly, if you could talk about how you've taken this sort of systems approach that Equimundo is taking to sort of understanding and addressing this problem and using it to develop and adapt measures for TFGBV in the multi-country survey that you measured. And more importantly, both Lynn Marie and Vicky, and I think all of us grapple with the trade-offs involved in balancing standardization as well as local relevance, right? When we're measuring TFGBV across different contexts, this is a big challenge. So if you could very quickly respond to some of the steps that you've taken.
Yeah, Sangeeta, it's a great ask, and it's always very tough. And I know that Vicky and Lynn Marie have both already alluded to that, right? So, I mean, we all sort of have our understanding that we have these standardized core questions. We also want to make sure that we locally adapt the work. So let me give an example beyond what we've already discussed, because I think what we're doing, again, in this sort of multi-country study, which is not public yet, but it will be very soon, is very interesting, right? So we've got this sort of survey instrument and we've got these core questions, and then we're working with local partners and making sure it makes sense. Parallelly, what we've done is we've actually done this kind of community level mapping of the networks and the digital ecosystem that young men and women and all people of genders are actually consuming. And so we worked with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, ISD, who sort of, kind of conducted an ethnographic landscape analysis across YouTube, Instagram, X, TikTok, etc. And they mapped a little over 600 sort of manosphere accounts across both Brazil and South Africa. And they analyzed those narratives. What are the tactics? What are some cross-cutting platform dynamics? And this sort of approach has helped us think about, okay, there are certain questions that absolutely make sense to ask around, perpetration, around experience of TFGBV. In addition to that, what Chloe was mentioning is what are the kind of content that young people are consuming. So let me just give you one quick example. In South Africa, some of the manosphere content that the ISD team has found is that it sort of has a very anti-migrant sentiment that's directed at, maybe Nigerians or Zimbabweans. And the misogyny is intersecting with xenophobia in ways that don't exist in Brazil. And so in an ideal setup, we would do the mapping first and then include some of those nuances into the survey in order to be able to say, okay, what is the content, right? Because I think it's more than just talking about prevalence. It's more, we have to kind of map those things. So they're very important. But we also, as Chloe was alluding to, need to understand what is being exploited. What are the narratives in which they're actually amplifying the kind of zero-sum game and the misogyny that we see. So just to sort of say, I think having this kind of combined approach of individual data and then the mapping of the networks has been really, really unique and helpful. And ideally, you would sort of do it in a step-by-step process in order to be able to really, really localize the work.
Thank you so much, Tavishi and Chloe, and appreciate the challenges that are involved in doing nuanced work that we're all very interested in doing, but then they often end up being quite resource intensive, both in terms of time and funding that we all sort of deal with. And I'm conscious that we have about 10 minutes left, and I'd like to sort of give the audience an opportunity to ask you some questions. So if you have any questions for our panelists, please do use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to add in questions. And I can quickly take a look and read out some of the questions that we have already. So Crystal has a question for Victoria. Did your research find unique terminology or images perceived as TFGBV in each context? If so, did you find it useful to develop a local dictionary with terminology or slang specific to Nigeria, Uganda, etc.?
Yes. Oh, should I just respond to that? Yeah, that's a really good question. And also, Ali, feel free to add on to this because we conducted this together, the research together. But I think when I look at that question, one of the first things that comes to mind is that, when we're talking to some of the women, they didn't even have terminology or like a definition. They didn't know how to define their experiences or like experiences within their context in regards to online harms. They didn't even, in some cases, see it as violence, but then they knew that it was abuse towards, someone, for example, online. So I can't remember us finding any specific terminologies that were unique to those contexts, but I remember that in some instances, people didn't even have a definition they didn't even know the term TFGBV existed. But when we're able to articulate this and we got into these conversations, they're like, okay, then it is actually a form of violation or a form of abuse against women that are or men or whoever it is that are occurring online. So that was a really interesting finding that we saw. But Ali, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Just to add very quickly that, so we looked at the compendium, and that was a very expansive view of what has been studied. But then we asked also very openly about other types of harms, for example, financial fraud, which is fairly common in places like Nigeria, but also Uganda. And it was really interesting. We thought, well, maybe there's no gendered element to it. And actually, we found there was a lot of depth to it, and women were very familiar with financial scams and fraud, and it was quite gendered. Lots of romance scams and grooming for jobs, etc., but ultimately with malicious intent. So we rather than creating a dictionary, we just really open it up to the women to allow them to kind of tell us what their experience of it was, and then we categorized it after.
Thank you so much. And we're almost out of time, but I do want to flag one question for Lynn Marie. It's from Alejandra. It is important to make explicit the agreement on how to report TFGBV so we can keep comparability. Again, the issue of standardization versus having measures be culturally sensitive. And the question is there any advancement on that agreement amongst international agencies? And I'm sure that's a work on progress, but Lynn Marie, if you could weigh in on how the WHO goes about getting these kinds of measures, standardized measures tested.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, some of it is how, the testing, the cognitive testing and the pilot testing that we do with any new questions. And just to give you an example, because this is on many of our minds, we're going to be publishing an updated module or a section on non-partner sexual violence, and and this receives a lot of peer review, but will also need field testing, etc. And through this expert review, the unanimous decision within the group was to measure, even if it's measured as non-partner, as a existing form of violence, wherever you place it in a questionnaire, that to continue to report it separately so that there is comparability with previous surveys, but across countries, etc. And again, I think the testing and the qualitative work is really crucial for this. So hopefully, and we are coming up with a checklist as well that would include some of this information. So happy to share it with the community of practice to share this on further.
Thank you so much, Lynn Marie. And we have another question that I think any of the panelists can answer from Ayush. What are some cases or forms of TFGBV that are specific to Global South nations? What are the various technologies that are employed? If you can be country specific, that would be useful. I know this is a difficult question to ask because it's super broad, but if anyone would like to take a stab based on their research findings. Anyone has a country specific answer? Okay. We can then move on to another question, which we have for Vicky. Were there any interesting or surprising findings regarding children or adolescents' experience of TFGBV in Uganda?
Yeah, that's another great question. So while we were only interviewing adults, I remember that we did get some information or discussions that emerged around how school-going adolescents experience TFGBV. And this could be in the form of, cyberbullying, group attacks. Sometimes, I guess teenagers or kids can be mean to each other, and we know that kids have phones, access to phones nowadays. So I think that's one of the most salient findings that we found in relation to adolescents, which actually we are trying to present these findings to the Ministry of Education and Sports in Uganda, for example, so that our work can also inform their violence against children and school violence related policy priorities and data collection activities that they're planning to conduct. So we are hoping that we are able to translate some of our findings or some of the measures that we've created and incorporate them within measures that the ministries or survey instruments that the Ministry of Education, for example, have already designed that are seeking to collect data on violence against children and school violence. So yeah, we did find some interesting findings on adolescents and primarily in the education and school going context. Yeah. Ale, do you want to add anything?
Just to say again, we didn't. Our work didn't cover work with adolescents. In some other work, we've seen that they are experiencing their intimacy online, and yes, they're actually much more vulnerable to harassment, sharing of intimate images, etc., than adults. But we can share some of that work.
Lynn Marie?
Yes, sorry, this is just also related to the previous question on, measures in countries, and it just occurred to me, but along with UN Women, but WHO has also been creating a repository of questions across surveys and across countries. And if it would be helpful, the questions about a specific country or etc., this is a resource that probably would be useful for us to share. And the DHS, the Demographic and Health Surveys that are largely focused on low and middle income countries, have also developed a question set, and we're working closely with them because at the end of the day, what we want is harmonized questions that lead to some form of standardization, but with taking context into account. So happy to carry on that conversation. Thanks.
Definitely. And I think everyone will unanimously say that we would love to share those resources. So very much look forward to that. We're almost out of time, but there's one question, and I don't know if it's applicable, but did anyone sample specifically women in leadership, especially political leadership, or develop specific measures for this very specific subsample? Chloe, yes, go ahead.
Not yet, but we'd love to sort of jump in on that and welcome any, well, please do reach out to anybody who's maybe working in the space. Equimundo is putting together a global men care changemaker journey and goes across 7 action tracks. And one of our action tracks is on democracy, violent extremism and tech-enabled harms. And one of the through lines that we're looking at for that action track, which we're doing in collaboration, I should say, with the Christchurch Core Foundation folks, and particularly their Project Catalyst, which looks at the intersection of violent misogyny as a pathway to violent extremism. One of the core demographic groups that we're looking at there is female women politicians in leadership. And so one of our change makers is Hannah Phillips from the Joe Cox Foundation. And Joe Cox was a female MP who 9 years ago, in a couple of months, was murdered in her constituency by extremists. So all that to say, really important. All really important, but we're very aware both of the intersection of gender backsliding that we're seeing around the world, how that is interacting with democratic backsliding as well, and with particular kind of targeting of both female political leaders, some research is also showing that male political leaders experience some targeting online in different kinds of ways. So we're sort of paying attention to that too. And that this is having the chilling effect is a term we often talk about in terms of, political public life and political participation. So an open call for any and all resources that anybody in this room may have that could support us in this. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And thank you so much to all of our speakers for being so generous with your time and sharing the learnings from your work with all of us. And I'm sure there's a lot of interest in keeping this conversation going. And I'm sure that Francia, our new measurement and ethical digital research working group lead, can take this work forward. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
And as we say goodbye, I just want to ask Barsha and Francia to turn on your cameras and wave, and you'll be seeing a lot more from us as the working groups kick off. Thanks, everybody. This was a fantastic session, especially to our panelists. Thank you again.
Thank you.